Welcome to Invest Well, Be Well, a podcast for wiser investing and stronger living. I'm Rusty Vanneman, longtime investment professional, and I'm joined each week by my co-host, Robin Murray.
Thanks, Rusty. I'm a storyteller and journalist, and I am so excited to explore the ideas, insights, and people shaping the intersection of performance and purpose.
This podcast is for thoughtful investors and driven professionals who want to grow in their portfolios and in their personal lives.
We'll talk long-term investing, behavioral finance, personal development, and what it takes to live and work with intention.
So let's get started. Let's invest well and be well together.
This podcast is brought to you by Main Management, LLC. Since 2002, Main has been recognized as an ETF strategist that combines an institutional process with the personalized service of a boutique firm. Well, our guest today is Skip Schweiss, CEO of Ocean Park Asset Management and Sierra Investment Management. And that was a really great interview. He had a lot of really great takeaways.
He did. So Skip is somebody I've known for a while, and he is somebody who has truly made a lasting impact on the investment advisory industry. And he definitely knows a thing or two about a lasting impact in life. He's a respected leader. He's an advocate for independent financial advisors and planners. As we mentioned, the CEO of Ocean Park Asset Management, also former president of TD Ameritrade Trust Company, served as a president of the Financial Planning Association, the FPA. He's played a key role in fiduciary policy discussions in Washington, D.C., and today he continues to support registered investment advisors as an industry consultant and board member. But his story isn't just about boardrooms and Capitol Hill. He's also a lifelong adventurer, someone who has climbed every one of Colorado's 14,000-foot peaks, and he brings a deep, grounded perspective on how to lead, live, and serve others. And in this conversation, we talk about leadership, the future of financial advice, and the life lessons Skip has learned. So what are some of your big takeaways, Robin?
I mean, he just had so many great nuggets that I thought he had a lot of great quotes and words to live by. He had some advice from his mom there that we ended with, keep your mind and your body moving, his 88-year-old mother, and just a lot of great stuff. His experience in Washington was super interesting, and all of the influence that he's had over the years. He's just, like you called him the wise man in the mountain. I thought that was pretty cool, and that's kind of fitting.
Well, I think, Skip is kind of the definition of a leader. And so again, just knowing him professionally and personally, and the reason why is because people trust him and there's humility to him. And so that's kind of the key to wiser investing is the trust. I mean, we're all human beings, and that's a really important element to being successful investors over time, trusting the people you work with. But he also, when it comes to stronger living, he gave, as you said, so many nuggets on how to live a stronger life. And I thought it was a great interview.
Yeah, good stuff. Let's listen. Well, Skip, welcome to the show. Welcome to Invest Well, Be Well.
Thank you very much, Robin. It's great to see you and Rusty again.
Yeah.
Well, Skip, we're excited to have you here. And as you know, a holdover from our last podcast that Robin and I did together is we need a walk-up song to set the tone and tenor of today's interview. What is your walk-up song?
I wondered if you were going to carry that over. So I'm going to change gears from the last time we spoke. One of the lessons I've learned in life is only look in the rear view to learn lessons from it, but don't dwell. And I think that applies to investing as well. So I'm going to go with Don't Look Back from Boston.
All right.
I do love that. That was my official last pump-up song before every baseball game that I play.
Wow.
So obviously I'm a fan of that one. Great.
Yeah, I love Boston's one of my favorite classic rock bands, and I thought that song title applied here.
Yeah, it's a good one. All right, well, Skip, let's talk a little bit about you and your background. You have a career that spans leadership roles at TD Ameritrade, Financial Planning Association, and now you're serving independent RIAs. Can you talk about some of the most pivotal moments that really shaped your professional path?
Sure. There have probably been a lot. One I remember a lot, and I tell people who are earlier in their career, I was a young in financial services. I was working at a trust company, just kind of client service operations type role. And then I made the big jump to assistant team supervisor. And I was on my way to managing a team. And then I saw a job posting in another part of the organization for this little startup thing within the bigger company. And I said, that sounds pretty exciting. I'm going to step off the management track for at least for a while and go do this startup thing. And it turned out to be an RIA custody business that the firm was starting up. And you fast forward years later, and I was able to be responsible for that business, which we eventually sold to TD Ameritrade. And I tell people, don't be afraid to take a step down on the ladder. That was really a pivotal point for me. And I just really, in the moment, felt compelled to do that. And then when I joined TD Ameritrade, I think a second pivotal point was Tom Bradley, who ran the institutional business there, asked me to take on the public policy advocacy role. And I'd really been involved in and interested in politics literally since my teen years. We won't go there, but I jumped at the chance. And that meant I got to go to Washington and meet with regulators and legislators about policy impacting financial advisors, and then give a lot of talks around the country to advisors on, here's what's going on in Washington, here's what's coming down the pike that could impact you and your business and your clients. And that really opened up a whole new career path for me, really mid-career, that I hadn't seen coming, but it led into eventually a leadership role, the Financial Planning Association board, and they're leading their political action committee board, and just all kinds of dimensions from that. So it's interesting how those inflection points in one's career, whether it be early, mid, late, whatever, can lead to really exciting new avenues.
So your experience has really been at the intersection of both policy, as you said, in Washington, and practice. So can you talk about what lessons you've learned about creating impact, either in an organization or across an industry?
One thing I've really learned is you got to build trust first. I mean, you can have whatever title and position in an organization, but if you don't have trust, nobody's going to follow you. I was in Washington once with a couple of colleagues and talking about issues relating to financial advisors, and we went into the office of a Republican member of Congress. And as I would find out during the course of this meeting, one of my colleagues was from quite the other end of the political spectrum and actually ended up getting into a heated argument with the member of Congress, which I was embarrassed by. But the lesson I learned walking out is, again, you've got to build trust and you've got to talk to someone in their language. And ever since then, before I walk into a member's office, whoever I'm with, they say, look, we have different talking points in the Democrat's office versus the Republican's office. We're trying to get to the same place, but we want to respect them and their views and how they look at this issue. And that was it was a hard learning, but it was a great learning for me. And I think same with leadership in business. Your employees have to trust you first or they won't follow you. Trust is a big lesson I've learned over my career.
Let's talk a little bit about the industry and talking about financial advisors and registered investment advisors. So from your perspective, what's the state of the independent IRA industry today, and where do you think it's headed?
Well, it's very healthy. And I've been around it, let's say, for, I don't know if I can do the math, 30 years, 40 years. I've watched it from its nascence in the 80s when this investment advice industry moved from institutional to retail. And now, we've got, 17,000 SEC registered advisors and other close to that number state registered advisory firms around the country. The brokerage firms have all opened their own investment advice shops. Most of them are earning around half of their revenues from investment advice as opposed to brokerage. And I'm not an anti-broker. I emphasize that to a lot of people in this kind of conversation. I think different clients at different times have different needs. It could be brokerage, it could be advice. So I think it's great that they have that choice now. I think it's very healthy. I think it will continue to grow and evolve. It's been interesting to see the investment money come into the field in the last roughly decade and recognize the profitability, the growth, the scalability of investment advice firms, especially the larger ones who have really figured out the growth equation. So if I have one thing that I've lamented for a long time that I think we haven't figured out yet, it's how to serve the lower to middle end consumer. Those folks, I think, are still being served by It might just be their self-directed Schwab or Fidelity account or Robinhood account. It might be the LPL recommending, load mutual funds, which is fine. But I'm a huge fan of the fiduciary advice model, but we've never figured out how to scale that down market. And I would just love to see someone figure that out.
Well, in our prep work for this interview, we've seen that you've spoken about keeping the soul of financial advice. I love that phrase. But what do you mean by that? And how do you see advisors balancing fiduciary duty with scale and technology?
Great set of questions. I feel like the soul of investment advice is do what's in the best interest of the client. And that might not mean making the most money on that transaction or that client or in the near term. I know a lot of advisors will take on a client who doesn't meet their stated minimums because they like the relationship or they think they can see it growing over time. I think that's great. But do what's in the best interest of the client. And as far as the industry scaling, I just hope that continues. And I really haven't seen much in the way of hitches in that formula. I hope as all this money that comes into the industry continues I could envision risks where outside money is maybe not quite as attached to do the best thing for the client as the people who have been providing that service to the clients for all those years. I haven't seen evidence of that. I just can envision that risk. But to me, the soul is do what's in the best interest of the client.
Can you talk about what you think the role of behavioral finance and what that plays in how you think about serving clients and also guiding advisors?
I will start by saying I am no expert in behavioral finance, other than in my decades on this earth, I have come to learn that humans are complex animals, and we're often motivated by things that we don't even understand ourselves, why we're motivated to do something. I think about my financial planner and my financial planning firm, and when I started the relationship with them, we started with the portfolio and what my goals were, and that's great. And they didn't really rush down the path of what about your estate plan? What about your insurance? What about your kids' college? What about your retirement plan and all those components? It was more, a year from now, we'll deal with one of those and another and another. If they had thrown 6 elements of financial planning at me right away, I would have been overwhelmed and I might have just shut down. And I think they know that. I think good planners know that you try to incrementally get someone to a better place. Help guide them to get them to a better place. So that's a little bit about how I think of behavioral finance. And I haven't really been an investment advisor. I've been more on the kind of operations side, custody side, business side my whole career. But just being in the space, I have lots of friends and family members ask me, what should I do about my 401k or about this insurance or what do you think about this stock or whatever? And I tell them there's no one single answer, like you should put this much money in your 401k or is this stock good for you or not good for you? You got to get to know the person, got to get to know their motivations, got to get to know their goals and their life situation and how all that fits together. And then you do have that tough element of there's things going on in here for all of us that I don't even understand, that it's invisible to me why I might do something, why I was motivated to do something. So I think a good planner too will try to ask questions and get to some of those kinds of things to get to the best answers for the client.
This episode of Invest Well, Be Well is brought to you by Main Management LLC, a pioneer in actively managed ETFs since 2002. Main Management starts with a clear fiduciary focus, delivering the transparency and personal attention you'd expect from a boutique firm. They provide financial advisors with solutions, not products. Maine also believes investors should keep more of what they earn, emphasizing net of fee after-tax performance to help clients retain more of their returns. I've known Maine Management for years. I've met thousands of managers over the course of my career, and one quality I really value, they invest alongside their clients. They eat their own cooking. Over 10% of the assets they manage are their own partner assets, and more than half of the firm are partners themselves. That says a lot. To learn more about Maine's strategies, including buy right hedged equity, U.S. sector rotation, thematic innovation, and all asset models, please visit their website at mainmgt.com.
So you've been described as a servant leader. Can you talk about how you define leadership and what practices have helped you develop that style?
Boy, define leadership. That's a harder question than I thought it might be. But I think of it as marshaling the organization's resources to achieve its objectives. Could be human resources, technology resources, physical, product, all that, and coordinating all that to reach the organization's objectives. The hardest part of that in my book is the human side. I've really adopted practices around, what's our vision? So if we could wave a wand in our perfect world, what would the world look like? And then our mission, how are we going to go about that? Our values, which I think are tremendously important. It's probably maybe 5 to 7 values, and you'll see a lot of companies' values, and it will typically have integrity and client first and teamwork and things like that. But in our organization, we came up with all of those in collaboration with our leadership team, shared it with the teams, and then we survey, we do 360s and survey, how is this person living our values? And it can be really insightful, and it can identify kind of problem areas in the organization where, hey, maybe the organization isn't living this one particular value that we said is important to us. We need to place more emphasis there. And then the objectives of the organization. What are we trying to achieve? Short-term, medium-term, long-term. What are we trying to achieve in terms of growth or cultural evolution or serving more clients or expanding our services or product offerings? It all sounds kind of simple and textbooky. In practicality, I find it to be very hard, but it's fun too.
I want to follow up on a topic we had earlier in the interview, and that was your work in Washington and all your efforts there. What was your proudest moment, and was there any unfinished business that still motivates you?
I've been doing it a long time, and one thing I think some people think is, well, let's send our lobbyists to Washington and get this thing done, or this thing stopped, or whatever. Things move so slowly there, typically, especially in terms of longer-term policy goals. It can take years, and you just have to have the patience, and you have to form the relationships. But I think one set that stands out for me is the Secure Act. And of course, we've had 2 versions of it now, 1 and 2. But I think we on this conversation would acknowledge we have a retirement funding crisis in America that a lot of people just aren't saving enough. And so the Secure Acts, I think, created better pathways to do that. They opened the 401ks to some part-time employees. They introduced the catch-up contributions, made it easier for smaller employers to pool together and adopt a pooled plan, push back the required minimum distribution age. I mean, I know lots of people, it used to be 70 and a half, of course. I know lots of people in their 70s in the workplace. And it's just a little silly if you're working and to earn your living, that you should also have to start taking money out of your retirement accounts at age 70 and a half. So that's gotten pushed back to, it's ultimately going to be 75. I certainly won't claim credit for, all those things having come to pass, but I was at least a drop in the bucket of making a lot of those things happen. You asked about unfinished business. But sort of broadly, one thing for me is personal finance education. I remember going through school, like high school, and you're learning about biology and history and sociology and government, and there's some value in all of those things. We don't teach personal finance. And yet pretty much every day for the rest of my life, I'm going to need to apply I'm living in a personal finance world. I've got to balance my checkbook. I've got to know how much insurance I should have and how deductibles work and how those trade-offs work. And should I make decisions around, should I put more of my excess cash flow into my student loans versus my 401k? And should I lease a car or buy a car? There's just a ton of decisions, and I think you're making them every day, and yet we don't teach it. We just throw people out into the world. Now, there's been progress made at the state level to require, I think about half the states now have a requirement that high school kids get a semester of personal finance, which I think is great, but we've got a ways to go there.
Let's move to the second part of our interview here, and we're going to move away from sort of the wiser investing part to the stronger living part. So let's talk about some of your epic adventures. And so, for instance, you're one person who has hiked all the 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado. For an additional frame of reference, I recently hiked with you in Colorado Springs at a place called the Manitou Incline, Manitou Incline, which is where Olympians will go, boxing champions will go. And you did something I'm sure that almost nobody does, and that is you never stopped once going up the incline. So it was amazing. So in short, what do all these experiences teach you about resilience, presence, and mental strength?
Resilience, presence, mental strength. Well, I might have to sidestep just to play off that Manitou Incline observation for a moment. I've done that, I don't know, 8 or 10 times. It's an hour from my house, and it's as you know, it's a phenomenal workout. 2,765 steps up Pikes Peak from 6,000 to 8,000 feet. And yes, the Olympic Training Center there is there. Olympians train there. Kids from the Air Force Academy train there. But one thing I've learned, that's the first time out of all the other times I've done it that I've been able to go bottom to top without stopping. The key is to pace myself. And I'm pretty late to learn some lessons, but that's the lesson I've learned is to pace myself. So it was great. Enjoyed doing it with you and a couple of our friends. Resilience, I think you talked about. Boy, is that a big one. I gave a talk to a group of emerging leaders a few weeks ago, and I got the question after I finished, like, how can we develop resilience? And it's hard to do it from a book. You have to get knocked down and learn how to get back up, and that failure isn't fatal. My outdoor adventures have done a lot of that for me. You can be 5 or 10 or 20 miles out there, and snowstorm, rain, hail, wind, heat, cold can descend on you, and no one's coming to get you. Another of my lessons, I was a Boy Scout, and the Boy Scout motto is be prepared. And so I tend to be prepared. I tend to carry a bigger pack than might seem necessary. And I've had people make fun of me for my big pack, and then somewhere during the hike ask me if I have an extra jacket or water bottle or something like that. So that's a little bit ironic, but resilience is huge. Related to me is persistence. I've told many people I think my only real skill in life is persistence. Other than that, I'm tremendously flawed, but people can't out-persist me. And that serves me outside as well as just in life and business and everything. I love the quote from Winston Churchill, who said, when you find yourself going through hell, keep going. It's really clever, but it's also like, don't stop and dwell on it. Keep going. So presence, you talked about presence. Gosh, that's a hard one in this era, especially with all the distractions. And that's one that's a life challenge for me. And especially again, in this era with this thing in our hands that's just always beeping and buzzing at us and demanding our attention. It's a challenge for me every day. But one of the ways in the outdoors, and I've done a lot more hiking and trekking than actual like rock climbing, but I've done some climbing. And when you're on that wall and you're trying to suppress your fear and summon the courage, you have to focus on, I got to find that next handhold that I can reach. And if I can do that and pull myself up, then I can get this one foothold. And then I think I can move through this terrain. And in that moment, you can't be thinking about your family, your business, your friends, your favorite sports team. I mean, you got to think about, where am I going to put my hand? And to me, that's presence. I've never been anywhere else that demands presence like that demands being in the moment. But translating that to then everyday life and just turning my attention away from the screen feels like a bigger challenge than getting up that rock wall.
So a lot of lessons about mental well-being and how those adventures have impacted that. But can you talk about how those experiences have impacted your decision-making, your energy management as a leader?
Yeah. I mean, I love being outdoors. I grew up outdoors in the Midwest, and it just stayed with me. When I moved to Colorado and looked at those mountains, I just said, wow, I'm home. I'm going to go play up there every chance I get. And being outside gives me tremendous energy. Even thinking about going outside gives me energy. If I have a plan, like, hey, this weekend I'm going to go do this hike, or next month I'm going on this ski trip with friends, gives me a lot of energy. I think you asked about decision making. Again, when you're way back there and things aren't going exactly according to plan. Another quote I remember, Mother Teresa said, "Do what you can where you are with what you have." In other words, don't sit and lament that, gosh, I wish I would have brought gloves or heavier gloves, whatever. Wish I would have packed an extra water bottle. You didn't. Now what are you going to do? And so you have to make decisions, and this translates to life and to business. You have to make decisions based on the resources you have. I know in business, we're always talking about, well, if we just had more money or the different tech stack or this or this. Well, you don't. Maybe in time you can, but you don't have those right now. Make a decision based on what you have right now and the best you can do with it.
Great. So there's a podcast episode that you did with Ridgeline, and you talked about being where your feet are. What does that mindset mean to you in today's world of, like you mentioned, your phone constantly distracting you and all of the busyness that we're dealing with?
Yeah, it goes back to what I said before, and it's so hard. I said I'm maybe good at persistence. I'm not so good at being where my feet are. And I have to find myself really working at it. Like if I'm in a group of friends and we're at a ball game, but I'm thinking about my business or about my family, or, oh gosh, my phone just buzzed. Just being in that moment. And I think we all do that to a degree. It's trying to minimize. It's back to that decision thing we talked about a minute ago too. Like, I need to decide to be in this moment and to commit to be in this moment. If I don't respond to Rusty's text for 2 hours, I think he's going to be okay with that. As opposed to if I don't, no,
definitely not.
Probably don't need to respond to it in 2 minutes. But it's a constant challenge for me to be where my feet are.
Well, that's another great phrase. I love it. So if I see you, and knowing over the years, I see you as a wise man in the mountain, kind of literally and figuratively. So you have all this great advice, but kind of churning it around, what's the best piece of advice you have ever received, either professionally or personally?
I'll give a couple. One, and this is one I learned early, and I think I'm generally okay at it, although it's a constant balancing act, is pick your battles. I know people who everything's a battle, and they have to win, and no matter how small, medium, or large it is. I am one to say, I'm letting go of that one, and I'll live to fight another day, or I'll save my ammunition, so to speak, for the larger battles. But I would say my greatest role models in my life were my parents. And they weren't ones to say, well, here's our set of rules, or, constantly pound the table about this principle or what have you. But one thing I always remember my dad would say over and over and over, anything worth having is worth working for. And that was such great advice for me, classic Midwestern philosophy, but that really stuck with me. Like, hey, if I want that thing, and, as a kid, it might have been a toy or a new bike or whatever. And, maybe I had to get a job or I had to help around the house to earn that thing. And today it's really principally the same in business or life. I can look up at that mountaintop and say, I'd really like to get to the top of that mountain, but I don't have access to a helicopter. There's no escalator. There's only one way up there, and that's to work for it. So that was some of the best advice I ever got, and it's stuck with me all these decades later.
So we've talked about being outside, and we've talked about hiking, but what else do you do to invest in your own well-being?
It's funny. I have my whole life, I think, my whole adult life, I've really placed an importance on sleep. And early to mid adult life, I used to have people say like, why, or why do you want, really focus on getting this much sleep? And now it's become a thing. Now it's, you really need sleep. That's how your brain recharges and learns the lessons of the day and embeds them. And so sleep is huge for me. I would love to get 8 hours a night. I don't. I probably am closer to 7, but 7 works. But I really do, I make that a priority. I mean, if I'm up at a certain hour, I'm looking at my watch saying, it's about time. And I don't wait till one of my children, she says she just can't get up in the morning, has a hard time getting up in the morning. I say, what time do you go to bed? Between 12 and 1. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'd have a hard time getting up in the morning too. So to me, it starts with bedtime. And I generally go to bed around the same time, and then I generally get up about the same time, and I'm pretty rested. If I need a nap during the day, and I'm not afraid to sneak a nap in. Like you, exercise every day is some form of exercise. It could be in the gym. It could be some simple things at home. It could be riding my bike or going for a hike or going skiing or just going for a walk. That's very important to me. And being around, this is a kind of an emerging principle as well, that one of the great things for your health is being around people, spending time with family and friends and having those interactions. And I think that's being proven as one of the great longevity drivers, is having a really healthy social life. And I'm extremely blessed to have what I consider a lot of really good friends and love my family members, and just really cherish time with them. And of course, getting outside. Anything outside for me is taking care of myself mentally and physically.
I agree. Okay. One more question to wrap us up. If there's any one thing that you want advisors or our listeners to remember from this conversation, what would it be?
My 88-year-old mother lives a ways in another state, but I call her periodically and ask her how life is going and how's her health. Now, she's a silent generation person, so she's not going to itemize her health issues for me. But all she says every time is, I keep my mind and my body moving. And I think that's such great advice. I mean, she's 88, she's in relatively good health. Your mind is all there. And for me, it's keep your mind and your body moving. I know we all know people who, they put in their work day and they come home and turn on the TV for a few hours and then go to bed. And, I watch some TV, not very much, but to me, that's not keeping my mind or my body active when I'm sitting on the couch watching TV. So obviously in our jobs, we spend a lot of time inside sitting. We're all sitting right now, I think. So you can't be physically active, 16 waking hours a day, but keep your mind and your body active.
Good advice. All right. Well, Skip, thanks so much for coming on the show today. It was a great conversation. Great to have you. Before you go, tell us, how can our listeners stay in touch and learn more about the work that you're doing?
Well, I work for Ocean Park Asset Management out on the West Coast. You can find us via the website there, or I'm somewhat active on X. They can find me on X, just Skip Schweiss. I haven't really formed a good identity on X. I'm sort of all over the place there, personal and professional commentary and observations, but you can find me there if you want to.
Well, Skip, I loved the advice from your mother, and it kind of reminds me of my grandmother's advice. She wrote out 10 rules for living a long life, and she lived to be almost 100. And she was from South Dakota, by the way, which you're from as well. And two of her key tenets were keeping your body moving and keeping your mind active, particularly through social interaction. She didn't write it like that, but that's basically what she meant. So
yeah, That's great. There's a book that's in a similar genre, 30 Lessons for Living, I think it's called. And the author, gosh, I'm going to forget his name now, Carl something, but he interviewed, I don't know how many dozens of people who were like, let's say between like 65 and 105 years old, about their life lessons. And it's priceless, really, the things. And it's, as they say, no one ever on their deathbed said, I wish I would have worked more. But it's, it's about decisions they made, but it's so much about relationships and family and the things we've talked about here. So it's one of my favorites.
Well, thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it.
It's been fun.
Yep. We'll be back next week. Thanks for listening to Invest Well, Be Well. Let us know what you think. And if you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe. This podcast is hosted by Rusty Vanneman and Robin Murray and produced by Garrett Crosby. Well, we'll be back next week. Thanks for listening to Invest Well, Be Well. And hey, if you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe.
If you have feedback, guest suggestions, or just want to connect, please visit my website, rustysbridge.com, or email me directly at rusty@rustysbridge.com. Until next time, invest well and be well.